It is Harris and Walz that are going to be with the UAW in Detroit this evening, and it was Tim Walz who was welcomed by organized labor, it seemed, yesterday with a slew of endorsements after he was announced as Harris's pick.
Yeah, this is all along been sort of the blue Walz candidate, right? And Tim Walz, really having that sort of Midwestern football coach kind of vibe that really sort of plays well in the industrial North, which is where Joe Biden's strength was, which is, as we all know, we've been talking about for the last 8 years, critical to Democratic fortunes. And it's no coincidence that the first place that they tried to deploy him is in those 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And it's also no coincidence that JD Vance showed up on a tarmac to greet the Harris-Walz ticket as they arrived in Eau Claire, because he's there to do the exact same thing.
And he's going to continue following them throughout the week. Blue Walz, by the way. Did you come up with that?
I did, just in the spur of the moment.
That was fantastic. I'm going to steal that. So he speaks to the Rust Belt, but we've been hearing about her opening a path, when I say her, Kamala Harris, in the Sun Belt states. Does his message land the same way there?
That's what it will be interesting to see. I think I think the divisions that the geographic distinctions that we tend to make in terms of these states are very different from other states. Look, you have blue collar workers in every state in the union. You have football fans in every state of the union. So we're talking about the relative strengths and relative weaknesses. I think Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket does very well in those states like Georgia and Arizona, very diverse states, ethnically diverse, but also, a growing sort of suburban population there that I think she appeals to as well.
Well, while JD Vance was on the road today, he had a kind of spur-of-the-moment press conference, it seemed, in which a number of things were said, including this idea that he thinks he may still be on for a debate against Kamala Harris in just a few days on August 13th. That was, of course, what Harris invited him to back in July when she still was the vice presidential nominee. I'm assuming that's not going to happen, Gregory, but I just have a lot of questions as to whether or not we're actually going to see a vice presidential debate or a presidential one, as Trump on Fox and Friends this morning suggested that they are going to have one.
Honestly, I can't quite keep track. This seems to be a continuation of the line of attack that Trump had, in trying to not commit to a debate with Kamala Harris because he said he committed to Biden and now it's changed. But now you have JD Vance saying that he doesn't want to debate Tim Walz because he still wants to debate Kamala. I don't know who's debating whom. It might be a round robin of some kind. We'll just have to see. But this is very unusual. What happened when we blew up this whole debate structure that we've had in this country for 40, 50 years, where the Commission on Presidential Debate has 3 regularly scheduled debates with a preset format that we all very predictable. And we all sort of gotten used to, and then for whatever reason, the 2 candidates decided to blow that up. And so now everything's up for grabs, including the debate over whether we're going to have a debate.
Let us know when you find out. The invite
absolutely will.
The invite stands here on Balance of Power. We're going to make that happen real easy on Bloomberg TV and radio. Gregory, Korte, we thank you so much as we turn our attention to the results from primary day. Congresswoman Cori Bush lost her primary battle in Missouri to St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell. Bush, a member of the squad, so-called, responding to her defeat in a fiery address to supporters.
Because see, now I don't have to worry about some strings that I have attached, and as much as I love my job. But all they did was radicalize me, and so now they need to be afraid.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Megan Scully for more on this. It was the race that most of us were watching in a night that had 4 states in play. But as I mentioned, the second member of the squad to go down in defeat. How much did this have to do with the Israel issue, the remarkable amount of spending from AIPAC in the state versus her own districts and her own challenges?
It had everything to do with AIPAC and pro-Israeli PACs who pumped millions into this race. The local economy was the #1 issue during this campaign in the St. Louis area district that also includes Ferguson and some other areas where there are a lot of low-income voters. But just the sheer amount of cash that was put in to support Wesley Bell really pulled him to the top of the ticket, even though Israel itself was not the primary issue.
Well, so it does seem we're seeing something of a pattern here. Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, of course, before her. Ilhan Omar has a primary in Minnesota coming up next week. Does she have reason to be very concerned right now?
So there has not been a ton of money from AIPAC and other affiliated organizations that have been poured into that race yet. They tried and failed, not to the extent that they did with Bowman and with Bush yesterday, but they tried and failed in 2022 and she's facing the same challenger on Tuesday. So we'll see. Perhaps AIPAC has a lot of money that it has said it will spend on these elections. So we'll see if they do a last-minute dump of cash in that district. She only won by 2 percentage points last time, so which is a lot less. Cori Bush in the last election walked away with that, overwhelmingly in the primary. So it will be one to watch next week, particularly as we're getting closer and closer to the DNC.
To what extent will AIPAC play a role in the general election? So
in total, they have said that they were planning to spend, I think, somewhere upwards of $90 million, which is a significant amount of cash, particularly when you're talking about some of these congressional elections. The issue of Israel nationwide is going to continue to be a top issue for debate. We'll see it if we ever do see a debate between the major candidates. And we saw it even in Kamala Harris's selection of her vice presidential pick. There were a lot of concerns about Shapiro and him being too pro-Israel and, what that meant for progressives. So it's going to continue to be a topic that it particularly divides Democrats and will be an issue to watch. So we'll see. But I will be watching that Omar race very closely next week.
Yeah, we all will. And, of course, we'll have it covered here on Balance of Power. Just finally, Megan, of course, it does remind us that it is not just about the presidential race, that there is the balance of Congress to consider. Is there a prevailing thought among either the Republican conference or Democratic caucus on Capitol Hill that the selection of Tim Walz as Harris's running mate has any ripple effect down the ballot in terms of Democrats being able to flip the House, for example?
So I think in general, since Kamala Harris became top of the ticket, that the House has become very much more optimistic for Democrats because you have this sort of enthusiasm, and it's going to come down to a race to get out the vote, particularly in New York and the Hudson Valley and in Southern California districts. These are blue states, and these are purple pockets in blue states, but where there are, between the two states, about 10 Republicans who are in tough reelection fights. If Harris and Walz can really mobilize Democrats and independents in those districts, the House can be won just in those two pockets by Democrats.